Welcome to the Art Scene Online Music Business Workshop. I'm your host, Jonathan Shaw, and we are proudly sponsored by the National Arts Council. This is the 8th video in our video series, and we will be looking at recording contracts and sync licensing agreements. A recording contract is a complex thing. They can often end up being hundreds of pages long if they're really complicated, and often very daunting for artists to go and sign. Often these days, recording artists have the opportunity to go and record their own albums and then license those to the recording company or a marketing company or a distribution company of some sort and then market it themselves. But oftentimes, to move forward in their career, at some point or another, you're going to need to sign a contract that gives away a lot of your rights in the hope that you are then able to move forward and up in your career. And remember that contracts are all about negotiating power. So the higher you go up, the more power you have, and often the more that you work with powerful people in the industry. So looking at recording agreements, an artist is often signed up to a record company to render their personal services as a performing artist, to perform in studio and to create albums that are going to sell. So these rights that the artist signs over to the record company are often exclusive to that company, meaning they can't go and work for any other record company out there. They have to do the work for that recording company. And of course, these rights that they give and the works that they create in the albums that they produce must be, in the record company's opinion, they must be commercially exploitable. So they have to be able to be sold in the market. And if they don't believe it's so, they'll send you back into the studio to continue recording until you have something that they can commercially exploit. Some artists try and negotiate for a pay or play clause. In other words, if you're not going to release the album, at least pay me out something. And don't waste my time. But many artists are not able to get this particular clause because it's not in the record company's interest to have to pay if they don't release. The amount of product that the artist has to release is often an album, so between 10 and 12 songs. And those songs must be of a particular length. So they must be between 2 and 3 minutes, say 4 minutes in general, and ready for commercial exploitation, and they must be commercially satisfying to the record company, as well as technically satisfying in that they were recorded in a studio and recorded with a professional producer. The royalties that the artist might get these days, it's often 50-50. So you find that the record company is negotiating you down from 50%. So in other words, they want you to have less. So they want you to have 40% of your streaming royalty revenue. In the old days, it was, say, 10 to 15% of the physical release, such as a CD or a vinyl, that the artist would receive at the end of the day. And they would often get advances that would match the type of sales that the record company was expecting. Then the record agreement lasts for a particular period of time. At some point or another, it was a number of years, and then it moved to being a number of albums. And of course, if you didn't deliver the albums, then the clock stopped. There was a suspension on the agreement. And so the agreement would then continue until you had delivered. So for example, if it's a 3-album deal, you would then have to deliver those 3 albums, and until you had, the agreement with the record company didn't come to an end. So there was various release requirements. A lot of artists will want, for example, that there is a major budget and that it gets released worldwide and that there's some sort of marketing effort in support of the album. And of course, then the record company will say, well, they might need to do a music video. And if that is the case, the cost of the video is then held against the artist. So you must just be careful of what the agreement then puts in place and to how it treats your royalties. And then there can also be an assignment. So if the record company sells their catalog, what happens if you had a particular key person that you were working at the record company? You might want to tie in your contract that you will go where that key person goes and not where the record company eventually lands up selling your catalog to. Then in terms of accounting, how do you keep track of all the royalties? Can you do an audit? What happens when there's a default? Are you able to get your masters back, which is often not what the record company wants? And you may want to build in some sort of breach clause that says that if the company breaches, you will then take over the master. All of these things are very complicated. Is there independent distribution? If you're with a smaller record company, these days everything is done through a digital aggregator, but in the old days you had to negotiate that there would be some sort of distribution agreement that was solid. And then, of course, what happens if your publishing for your songs lands up in your record agreement, and whether you'll get a decent deal instead of going with some independent publisher that would give you a better deal and work your songs better than a record company who only wants them in recordings and wants them in your specific recording and will only push your recordings, so your career as a songwriter may not take off. Then, of course, if we look at sync licensing, this is very important both for music publishing agreements and, of course, working the song as well as working the record. And these things include deal points such as term of use. How long does that person, say for example in a film contract, get to use your music for? With films, it could be forever. So if it lands up in the film, you get a single rate and that's it. And then, of course, any residual royalties that are made from the film being performed on streaming services or commercial broadcast services, you would then earn those royalties only. How many times do you get to use this? And if it's in a commercial advertising campaign, there might be a set number of uses, as well as the type of commercials. Are they radio, television, etc.? The type of broadcasting media that the advert may be used in, whether it's television or satellite advertising or radio advertising. The territory that they get used in, is it South Africa? Is it the rest of the world? Exclusivity, is it only for that particular ad agency, in which case you want to ask for a lot more money, or is it a broad use or a one-off use? Any promotional uses that if it lands up being used by a film company, whether that film company can also use it in the trailers that they might use for the film. And then, of course, any moral rights. Can they edit the particular song or recording that they're using, and do they have to actually tell who the songwriter is and even who the performing artist is? So those are a few points to keep in mind. That is it for our 8th video, and I will see you in our next video.